Hey, everybody. It's October 9th already, and it's Tinderbox weekend. I'm Mark Bernstein, the developer of Tinderbox, and here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. And it's not just Tinderbox week, and every day is a Tinderbox day. It's very exciting. So welcome to the meetup. The general format of the meetup is we go around the circle. We introduce new people if they so wish to be introduced. Explain to us how you ended up here at the community and what and how you're going about using Tinderbox. We then have people explain what projects they're working on, if they have any problems or things that they want to solve. And then we just generally talk about different thoughts and ideas and how we're using the tool. Now, this week we actually have a theme. It's around capturing and taking basic notes within Tinderbox and strategizing that process, which I'm particularly excited about. So with that in mind, let's jump right in. So as noted, it does seem we've got some new names and some people we haven't seen in a while, like Tillman. It's awesome to see you. It's been ages. So let's jump in and see if we have some, like Sean. I think you're new. John, I don't think I've met you before. You guys want to give a brief introduction?
Sure. John Kelser. I'm on the East Coast of Maryland. I've had Tinderbox for about I don't know, version 3. Been using it off and on, and been trying to join these meetups for a long time, but they always happen on a Saturday. And for some reason, Saturday gets away from me. But no, I'm here because I've got an issue, or not an issue. I've got a situation that I'm trying to figure out how to solve systematically, and I was just trying to get an idea of where to find some resources along those lines. So
you could not come to a better place.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go around the room, get the other people introducing themselves, and we'll circle right back to you, and we'll look at talking about your thing.
No worries.
Sean, you want to give us a brief intro?
Yeah, I was actually here a few weeks ago when this topic came up.
Yes, this topic is actually Sean's fault.
Okay, so it's all your fault. It's all your fault, Sean.
Great topic.
That's right. I've been experimenting with Tinderbox for years. I haven't really found an effective way to use it yet, though. But this particular topic is one of the key things that I've tried to do with it. I keep a lot of notes of different books that I've read, and also quotations from them that I jot down in physical notebooks, in Google Keep, in Google Drive, and they're all over the place. And it's often difficult for me to locate a particular quote or a particular book that I kind of vaguely remember. So I'm hoping that that the Tinderbox can help me solve this problem and sort of bring. I'm pretty good at collecting stuff, but actually putting it in one place where I can find it again and using it effectively, curating it essentially is something that I'm hoping this discussion will help me.
For sure. And there's two pieces to that. So what I heard you say is you've got, I call it the 5 C's in knowledge management. So you're doing collection and curation is what you're focused on right now. Do you ever want to get to the point where you can learn to publish and get your stuff out of Tinderbox, or is this more of a collection curation environment for you right now?
No, it's not. I mean, I am interested in publishing, but that's a whole different track.
Yes. So at some point, if you ever, I'll give you my email on the side. If you ever want to have a side conversation to see the end-to-end flow and process, I can't share it with you here now because of some confidential stuff, but I think it would be helpful to have you see the vision of where it could go.
Yeah, and just a sort of side note, I'm also interested. You mentioned the last time I joined this meeting, which was the first time, that I think your son or your daughter is using Tinderbox for studying a language. And since I am studying a language, I thought I'd be curious to know how they're using it that way.
Yeah, she's learning Latin, so she's trying to play with that. And then we actually have another.
That's probably a side topic. I'm very.
We actually have another member. Sorry, real quick. We actually have another member that I can't remember his name right now, but he does translation work. And so what he does is he realizes that, okay, here are the 5 different versions of translations for this particular concept or word. And he's able to use Tinderbox to maintain every single translation, look and review them, and then pick his favorite version of that and then write his own version, but yet keep the provenance in history of all of those different translations. So that's another concept that worked really, really well in Tinderbox. Okay, well, let's move on. Anyone else? All right. If not, do we have anyone? Let's jump to John then. John, what's your challenge?
Oh, in general. Let's see. It's work related. I am in a peculiar role in that I drive technical side of sales activities for for software, and I do a lot of proof of concepts, and it's what I'm going to call Bud Light project management. I don't need to go all dependencies scheduling. I just need to keep track of a bunch of things, but I also need to, back to your question about getting things in and out, I need to be able to report status. I need to be able to deliver, and this is kind of a weird one, meeting notes, which is how do I go through my list of things, put together an agenda, send it out, go through that list, update it, make any decisions or what have you, and then publish that out and have a bunch of events that are going to group things together for me. I just haven't quite figured out the modality of how to put. I found 4 programs that will do each one of these things nicely, but I haven't found one that does it correctly.
Yeah. So
yeah.
so if you look at the last 2 weeks worth of meetups, that was a topic that we've actually been discussing.
Okay, great.
And this one is my fault because I had the exact same problem you had, is take a bunch of meeting notes, then you want to be able to parse those meeting notes out, pull out decisions, pull out action items,
yep,
assign owners to those action items, and then quickly track it, and then be able to quickly dump a report. Yep. So let me do this let's schedule a side call on that. I'll drop my calendar information on that, and I'll show you what I'm doing, and then I'll be able to pop over and give you some templates that I've made.
Perfect. One other question, and it's more of an ask. These I clicked on the Venmo account for Mark and was embarrassed to see how many meetings I had never attended. But is there like a major topic agenda thing per meeting anywhere?
No, there isn't. We as a community want to get better about categorizing, organizing what we've talked about. But that invariably ends up taking a ton of work, and we're not as consistent with that as we holistically would like to be. I try to do the best I can, but I'm about 2 weeks behind in publishing files. The one thing that you might find useful though is, Mark, do you have a list of all the, I can't find the link where all of our past meetups were.
I'll put it in the.
Yeah. And then the other thing you might find useful is we have I'm looking for the URL right now, a list of videos that can kind of help you think things through. And I got that URL right here.
Yeah.
So
I found the ones with the Tinderbox, and it was just it's what there's a couple hundred of them. So I was trying to narrow it down, but it is what it is. I understand totally. So
yeah, and I just give you a link to our videos where we talk about specific topics and all of that.
Wonderful.
But the last 2 weeks we were talking about was specifically this note-taking thing, and I will promise to produce a video on that because I have that very specific problem, and I find it easier to learn it myself if I actually learn it through the lens of teaching somebody to do it. So
one of the things that I love about Tinderbox is that I can model things so many times and go iteratively figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it's like, anyway, it's wonderful from that end because I've solved a lot of little problems with it. I just haven't tackled something this large before.
Well, yeah, and actually, I actually have built my own version of Jira in Tinderbox to manage user stories and all of that. So we can talk about that on the side too.
Perfect. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Awesome. Yeah, so definitely a huge topic. We'll come back to it probably later in the year in this meetup. But for now, let's have you and I have a side conversation to solve it together, and then we'll figure out our solution and bring it back to the community. Good. Awesome. All right, Mr. Bernstein, you were going to walk us through your ideas on general note taking, as well as a community. We can just start collaborating on that.
Okay, I'm going to share the whole desktop this time. There we go. I have no particular answers here, but a couple of things that might be interesting. Let's take a look at this. Okay, first thing. If we're talking specifically about notes about your reading, which for lots of people is mostly books, for academics and some other people, it may be mostly journal articles, magazine articles, papers, things like that. But we'll talk in terms of books. Lots of people don't read, but they don't have a problem with book notes. People who do read still don't read, most of them, that many books. Well, that's 50 books a year, one a week. It's a lot of books, but that's means if you took a note on each book, which might be what you wanted if these books are mysteries, that's 50 notes a year, which is very moderate and manageable. Still over a decade, that's 500 notes. And so they do pile up, and you may in fact want lots of notes about books. If you're a professional, you may read a few hundred books a year. And so that just compresses it. No one really reads 1,000 books a year. Whether you're taking a note about a book or a few dozen notes about a book or a few hundred notes about a book, the notes tend to be short. They tend to be things like an author biography or an observation about how the book is constructed or what's particularly interesting about it, or a fact that you want to remember and use again. There's also the bibliographic information, where if you're planning to use this for a piece of formal writing, you will want the book notes to stay permanently connected to the information needed to at least find the reference again. A historical practice, which I think Tinderbox tends to encourage a revival, is the commonplace book. Before the photocopier, major problem when you're reading is if you don't own the book, if it's not your book, and books, remember, have always been fairly expensive, you wanted to copy down a particular passage so that, again, you could find it again. So early modern practice and late medieval practice as well meant that people jotted down lots of passages that were particularly interesting or controversial, that wanted to be cited or needed a response. And I think that that is a common theme of contemporary writing about book notes, that people want to get back in some form to that not entirely interior dialogue that people had with written work. Two books particularly good on this, Too Much to Know, by Annie Blair from Harvard University Press. Really dandy book about the first knowledge explosion in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, and the technologies that were developed to address it, things like the card catalog and alphabetical order. The other is, the title now escapes me, but it's easy to find. It's a book on journaling. I think it's a book of our own by Tom Malone, which is a great history of various forms of personal journals, and which the commonplace book is one. Now, in Tinderbox book notes, let me switch back to my own weblog, observe a couple of things. One, I've been bad about this, but for many years, I kept a log in my sidebar of the books bought in the last 45 days. I picked this up from Nick Hornby's column in The Believer, which every month used to begin with a list of books bought and books read. The column might not discuss any of the books read, and it might not mention any of the books bought. And over a course of months and years, you discovered that lots of the books bought never did get read. And lots of the books that got read, and especially books that got discussed, never got bought. But in fact, the books that you've acquired, and if you're in a line of business where people just send you books, the books that you actually have unpacked and put on a stack where you might intend to read them, are actually an interesting thing to follow. Second, do not forget the Get Info book pane. Let me actually select somewhere where there we go. Okay, you select a book. It shows you the ISBN you've recorded for the book. If you recorded the ISBN 10, the old ISBN, it will show you the ISBN 13 and vice versa. It will have links to various places where you could read about the book. We'll give you a copyable picture of the book cover. Thank you, Amazon. This can be shot. The other is if you select a note or a section or the whole document, you can get a word cloud, and you can tear this off from being a mere popover and make a bigger window. And this word cloud is also copyable. If you take book notes, especially if you are taking notes about your reaction to your reading, this word cloud applied to a specific set, to the book notes specifically, can be extremely helpful. For example, I discovered that my own writing about books tended to be how much I liked them all, and very little else. I mean, people book first, great, good. At one point, I worked with a newsletter that reviewed a fairly comprehensive list of offerings of new mysteries, both from large and small publishers. And this was known in-house as the Druid Review of Well-Written Mystery Fiction, because everyone said every book was well-written. The ill-written books don't get published, so you don't have to tell people about that. And again, it's easy to write agents that describe a question that interests you. What have I been reading lately? What did I read in 2019? What books, what notes about which books mention the following keywords that I'm interested in this week? On the forum of late, we've been talking a lot about agents as using a lot of time, but that's mostly a concern for data sets that have many thousands of notes. And your book notes will not have many thousands of notes for some time. Until you get to that scale, and perhaps even beyond, the amount of time that agents take to run is not a concern. So go ahead, make agents, use agents, and leave them lying around until they cause you a problem. Until you have a problem with agents, just use them and enjoy them. Same thing with rules. Rules are a way to enforce constraints on a class of notes. And again, it may seem like citation that already is a constraint, but computers nothing better to do while you're reading. So agents and their cousins' edicts are just great to have. So these are my general thoughts. For my own reading, I have attributes for the bibliographic information, which is generally quite sparse. I sometimes will include a link to the proper bibliography and bookends. And I just write my response in a note or two. But for more formal research projects, of course, it's a bigger thing. So that's what I have to say to kick this off.
Very interesting. Hey, Mark, couple questions. Is there an
Yeah.
export code to pull the image of a book into a template?
Not at present. At least I don't. No, there isn't at present. That may be coming.
Okay, that would be very cool. That was cool. I never seen that before. Before I jump in with my own thoughts, comments, ideas, does anyone else have any thoughts, comments, and ideas? What's your reaction to?
Just a basic question, the bibliographic information. It sounds like there's a template or there's a set of attributes you can add quite easily to like a prototype that will give you the basic sort of author, title, publishing information. Is that true? Or do you need to sort of construct that by hand?
So let's go ahead and open up a Tinderbox file and let's build this together. All right, and Sean, since it's all your fault, we'll use your method of. By the way, I'm just teasing you. Hopefully, you're okay with that. There you go. Your method of like resolving and finding quotes of a book or general notes. I think that would be a good idea. And like one of my favorite quotes is the future is already here. It is just unevenly distributed. Okay, so this is one of my favorite quotes. It's a quote by William Gibson. The future is already here and it's just unevenly distributed. And so the question then would be, how do we go about constructing that note, tagging that note, and capturing it up over time? I'm going to go find another file so we can pull something else in. Okay, and then the question then would be, other note and just managing your notes. So if you think about, you have note 1, note 2, note, and actually, if you don't mind, so we're not doing note 1, note 2, note 3. Does anybody have a book that they've recently read or some notes that they've taken that they wouldn't mind dropping into the chat? And then we can pull in and use those notes as fodder. So we're not just having some generic stuff.
Notes on a book?
Notes on anything, like book, a meeting, something that will be public and in the video, but just so we're not just talking note 1, note 2 or lorem ipsum, but actually having some real text. But let's start with the note of William Gibson. And Sean, if you don't mind, could you start over by asking your question about creating a prototype? Because I think that's a good one.
Well, yeah, I noticed you put the note itself in the title of the note. One question, I mean, it occurs to me if there's a particular book by a particular author and I have multiple notes about that book, that I probably want to have is storing the bibliographic information, and then in the outline form underneath that note, that sort of author name and book, a series of notes which are often could be comments on the book,
Sure,
or more likely quotations from the book.
Sure. And now again, there is no right or wrong way. And so the second you start going beyond where we're at right now, you start getting into your own personal methods and styles of doing something. And so to your point, you could start organizing that methodology where you say, let's say you are reviewing a book, and why don't we give the name of, give me the name of a book.
One
I'm sorry, you're breaking
that
up.
There's a book called Crazy Melon by Francis Chung, Chung.
Okay, let's just start with this. Crazy Melon.
Yeah.
Okay, did I spell that right? Two L's, one L.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's say you start with you're
That's right.
starting with a book called Crazy Melon. Now, if you noticed, I personally, this is a personal convention. I personally put prefixes in front of notes, and I do that for a lot of different reasons. Because if I do this, and I just do this, what if I have another note named Crazy Melon at some point? Can't find it. So what I do is I put prefixes so I can make a distinction between a book, an article, a product, a person's name, a quote, something of that nature. So that's the first step in a what we'll call a personal proclivity of the way I go about taking notes. Now, also too, for me, this becomes like a folder or a book, something else. Let's just kind of iteratively walk through this. We talk about it. And as I'm thinking about taking notes on a book, I immediately start realizing maybe map view is not the best method for this. Outline view might be easier.
Yeah.
So then we can go into outline view and we can start thinking about, now I want to take a note underneath Crazy Melon. So if you, by the way, here's a little side trick. If you hit Shift Option Enter, when you're selected on a note in outline view, it would actually create a note as a child in that note. And then doing that idea of prefix, I would say note, and then give me the heading of a note. Like, what would you want to say about Crazy Melon?
Well, let's just, the quote that I've got begins with the words, "The echoes of the night."
Okay.
So it's the echoes of the night trucks. That's the first line of a poem.
Okay. So we've got this thing called The Echoes of the Night Trucks. Now, this is, again, where it gets really interesting. And one of the powers of Tinderbox is, for me, and this is, again, why I make a distinction between this concept of prefixes and the use of other methodologies in Tinderbox. And again, because my goal is ultimately to drive output, i.e. reports that I can publish and other things. I also am thinking future self and trying to make my life easier down the road. But let's get to that. So this is the first line of a poem, and you could then put your, like, what would you want to be, what do you want to say about this? Are you just capturing the quote, the poem itself?
I'm just, in this case, I'm just capturing the quote. So there's
and
about
you're not
10
giving
lines.
yourself ideas or thoughts about why it's important to you or what it means to you.
Well, I might at a later point, but at this point, all I want to record is the quote.
Okay. And then what you might want to do too is potentially associate that, because again, for me, let's say I'm going to drop in a lorem ipsum here. So you could say, here's my quote, and maybe we put a prefix here so we can actually designate it.
Mhm.
Quote. And that's what I think about it. Those are my ideas around it. My challenge with doing that, however, is sometimes quotes are much longer than what you'd necessarily want to put in a title. Likewise, I might want my description separate from a quote.
Right. So I would typically want to put the quote in the body of the note. And any
Correct.
thoughts about the note would be in a separate note.
In a separate note. And good. That's where I ultimately go to as well. So on the Crazy Melon, though, before we get to the quote, let's grab a couple other notes. So what else might you say about this book?
Well, I've got the date when I recorded it. I don't know if
Well,
that's
let's not
really...
talk about attributes yet. Right now, I'm talking about notes.
Okay.
Give me some words around Crazy Melon.
Well, it's by a particular author who might have written other books.
Okay.
That I'd also
So, all right. So let's take a step back. So you already quickly went to this idea of prototypes, which was good. So I just went to the file menu and I selected prototypes and I picked the reference prototype. Okay. So so if you go to the file menu and you click built-in prototypes and you click references, there's a built-in prototype for references. Now you can also create your own prototypes very easily. So I tend to, like, if you can create a prototype called pbook and start from scratch, right? And this is a really great place to start with doing references. Now, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one pnote for just a second. Okay, so I've got a top level prototype called p references. And so you've got, let's say, we're now going to say this book Crazy Melon, I'm going to assign the I'm going to assign the prototype reference to that. And so now I've got Crazy Melon. It's a prototype as a reference. And now who's the author?
Francis Chung, Chung, Frances, Francis.
Yeah, by the way, I'm a horrible speller, so I'll just put that in now. You can fix it later. All right, and then you could go ahead and drop this in as a title if you want. Now now it's interesting that Tinderbox in its out of the box state says it makes this distinction between article and book title.
Mhm.
For me, because I like to keep things a little bit more generic, I would tend to go and create. I go down to the. I'll show you here. I'd go to the attribute browser. I would go ahead and create a new attribute for myself called title. And then and again, I'm just showing you the way I do it. I got a thing called title, and then I'm going to create another attribute called type. And I'll show you over here that I'm going to make that attribute a set, because there can be a variety of different types. And so now if I go back here and I reset that browser, I can now put the title of the book here, and I'm going to move type up here, and I'm going to call this one book, right? That's opposed to a different reference that I might call article. And we'll call this one privacy markets. Okay. And we'll make that a reference. Actually, it's the markets privacy, sorry. Okay. And the difference here is that is also a title, but this time it's an article. And the author is Kenneth Loudon. Right. And the reason why I personally do it this way is then later when I'm writing my export code, I don't necessarily need to know, is this attribute a book title or an article title? For me, a title is a title everywhere in all my action code. So I'm only using that one, both in my action code and my export code when I'm printing. So I'm always using the term title. And actually, sorry, I made a mistake. This would be here, and the type is article, right? And then likewise, when I'm running an agent to go find stuff, I can be searching on this thing called type. So now I've got a type called book, and I've got a type called articles. We'll do this by the end of the call, where I now can go run an agent and say, give me all my articles, give me all my books, give me all my magazines, give me all my other stuff. So now we've just started to create this kind of generalized category. Now, you said that Crazy Melon was published when?
2000.
2000. So you could go ahead here and put in the published date. Now, what's really interesting too, and if someone can do this for me while we're at it, I'm going to modify the reference prototype again, and we're going to go here. Can someone go grab me the ISBN?
It's in the chat.
Cool. Where is the chat? Where's the chat? I don't see it. Can someone copy it into so it's on the bottom of? Oh, there it is. I see Westland Publishing. Is that the one from John, the
Yeah.
publisher? Okay, got it. So if we grab the ISBN.
I think it's the book, but I pulled it off Amazon. I just
No worries. We'll
tell
just
her.
So, right. So here I can go ahead and drop in this ISBN. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. Here I can go ahead and drop in this ISBN number that I just put in here. Okay. So now we have the ISBN as well. So you can start collecting attributes for this book called Crazy Melon. And you can add as many attributes as you want in this. You can start dates, you can do URLs, you can do any number of different things. As Mark just taught us, and I'd never seen this before, you can do a get info, go to book, and now here's the picture of the book. And per our request earlier, if actually I'll show you something actually really kind of cool right now. Let me demonstrate this for you. Let's go ahead and drop in a lorem ipsum as well. And so if I do this, and now I go to get info, you'll see here that we can go down to the word cloud, and we now have a word cloud that we can be looking at on the text that you've had here. Now, one of the really interesting things, and I'm just going to look it up real quick before I do that. just to show you the power of Tinderbox and what some of the notes can
Yeah, I have a
do.
quick question. It looks like all you need is the ISBN number, and that'll pull in the
Yeah,
the
so,
other
so
information.
clearly, Mark has sprinkled some magic pixie dust behind here. And so he is doing an auto lookup against Amazon's book service to grab that titled image. And then if you recall the document, there we go. If you recall the I had asked him if you could pull that image into the file, and right now you currently can't, but eventually you can. And there is export code if we have time today that you can actually use to pull in to a text note. Actually, we'll just do it right now.
But even just having that ability to click an ISBN and see the information is really cool.
It is. And likewise, I think this is going to work. Let me double check. If I go to window and I turn on the show text pane. So this is an example called export code as well. So if I go in here, I can actually automatically have Tinderbox pull my word cloud into the notes as well. Right. So, Tinderbox is on the fly doing an analysis of that word cloud and then giving me that so I can see dolare is actually the word that's being rendered the most in this particular note.
So if I understand this right, if I wanted to see all the books that I've listed by this particular author, I could just search on or create an agent that looks up everything for that author.
Let's do it again.
I wouldn't need a separate note for the author, right?
Correct. So let's do this again. So I've got Crazy Melon 2 as another book. And I'll just go ahead and put that here and then watch this. So now I can go to notes. Sorry, go over here. We'll go to notes, create agents, right? And then it's going to pop up and it's going to say author dot I contains, because I don't want to do the full name, Chung. I'm sure I might have spelled something wrong there, but maybe not. Okay, so if I now click away and do that, I think I might have done it wrong. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I didn't parse it right. Get info, and I'm going to give you another real trick. Authors.I contains Chung. If I do that, Tinderbox will go and if I spelled Chung right, I did. Yeah, there you go. No. So why is that not working? And I'm gonna show you how to make agents a little bit more effective in just a second. What did I do wrong here, Mark? Oh, because it's a set, right?
Yep.
So I got to go format. And just to remind me, Mark, what's the importance of the L here? I mean, in terms of language.
You don't want an L, in fact.
What do I want?
You probably want a comma or a semicolon or a space. When you're formatting a list or a set, the argument is simply what to put in between elements.
Right, but I thought that was for output. Oh yeah, there you go. So in this case, you now see it's gone out and it's found all of the authors named Chung, but it's not found Loudon.
Okay.
Okay. Now the problem I have, the challenge I have with agents, and just as a little side note for people, one is getting. I personally find pulling up this get info kind of annoying after a while. So what I do is I actually create a prototype for myself called pagent. And I then go in here and I type in agent. I type in the agent action, agent priority, agent query. And I put the query up top. And to help me understand the distinction between an agent and other notes so I can visually see it, I personally like the little heartbeat sign here, or mountain sign, if you will. So this tells me that is, I can visually then see all of my agents. And now I can go like that. So I now visually see that that's an agent. I can see here's my query, here's my action, here's my priority. And now I can just easily go in and write and modify my agents right there. At this stage 2, what I might do is go in and drop in some separators so that I can now make a distinction between here are my agents for, find authors and such. So that's the way to go find books and things like that. But let's go back to your idea, and the fundamental part of what we were trying to do here was take notes. So you've got this book called Crazy Melon. It's got an ISBN. You've started adding attributes to that book. This is all a really important part of the process. But give me a note, an idea that you have about the book.
Yeah. So in addition to the quotation of the full poem, I had a note, Walter Lew's essay on this worth a closer look.
Okay. How do I spell Lew?
L-E-W is the last name, L-E-W.
Essay is what?
Is worth a closer look. It's just a reminder to myself that I want to look again at that particular essay in the book.
Okay, so there is a essay in the book called by Walter Lew.
Yes, and the essay talks about this particular poem. So I wanted to capture the poem itself, which is short, and I wanted to remind myself that the essay talks about this poem in an interesting way.
Okay, now here again is the nuance of notes. So for me, that's not a note, that's more of like a task, right? Something you want to assign to yourself to go do later. Is for me, a note is, this is what I think about something. Here are my ideas about it. Here is something that I'm thinking about, right? So for me, and again, this is totally different, but I'll just call it my feelings. I would say something like, Crazy Melon's book, expresses blah, 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 right? So essentially that, for me, that's a note, or so-and-so said this, or here's a statistic about that. When you're doing this idea of Walter Lew's essay, I'd say what I would do is I'd call this a task or an action item.
Okay.
And this goes back to what John was just talking about earlier in taking meeting notes. Taking meeting notes, an action item is different than a note, is different than a quote. And so what you start doing when you're starting to taking this note-taking process, you're also starting to evolve the way you're taking notes. So on that regard, I would create another prototype called task. And on that, I would add myself like start date, due date. In the case for John, this is just a little side note for you. In this case, it's owner, right? So now I'm, and then that actually creates a new attribute on the fly. And then, so I can make a distinction between those. I would go classic. So there's some kind of calendar task that I'd want to do for myself down the road. And so now I actually have a task. So now I've got a note, and then let's make it help us distinguish this too. For me, I use the little note-taking icon thingy. Where is it? There's one with a little pencil that I like. If I can't find it in 2 seconds, I'll default to something else. All right, I'm going to default to that. Yeah, that one. All right, so that's a note. So I can then go ahead here and say, okay, this one's a note. And now you've got this other one that we're going to make a quote. So now we've got another attribute called quote. Okay, and I again, the visuals are really helpful for me. So a quote has that, and now we can go like this. And so now quickly I can go see action items, notes, and quotes. And I can search on all of these things too, because now I can go ahead and remember we created a type prototype. And I can go ahead here and say, okay, this one is type quote, right? And this one is type task, right? And so because these notes are now tied to that, now this is a type task. This, and then let's add a type to this one. And this is just a generically typed note. Okay. So now you'll see for the Crazy Melon book, I have 3 notes. One's a quote, one's a general note, and one's a task for me to go off and do later. Right. And so again, this is the power of Tinderbox. If you just grabbed a bunch of text, threw it in there, and didn't actually add any attributes or help specialize it from the stem cell that is generally a note to then being something more actionable, functional for you, then you end up getting this Tinderbox file filled with hundreds of notes that you can't really do anything with other than doing search and replace or find. So I often attribute, for me, when you first open up a Tinderbox file and you look at it like this is like a baby being born or a baby being conceived, and it's got a bunch of stem cells that have the potential to be anything you want it to be. So here is what I'll call a stem cell note, right? And the second I start adding attributes to it, I start specializing it. It becomes a heart cell, it becomes a lung cell, it becomes a skin cell, it becomes, and then the totality of all of those cells make up the body of whatever piece of work that I'm trying to produce or do. That's the analogy that works in my head for me as I'm doing that. So I've got these 3 different types of notes here: quote, feelings, and essays that you can do. And again, it all depends on your kind of work that you want to be doing, in that, do you want to be actually putting a name here, or do you want to be doing this? Now, here's the other thing that I do that I find particularly helpful when I'm doing these kind of notes, especially because I'm really, really into the academics of it. I have an attribute I call citation key, and we can talk about citation management later, but I'll put that one up here. And I use a key as opposed to a full bibliography and such, because I use things like bookends or Zotero or some other tool that allows me to automatically pull my references into my notes when I do that. But for now, let's just, since we're not doing the automation, let's just have you make up one, and we'll call it Chung 2002. So you're going to give this book from Chung a citation of 2002, and let's make up that his other book was written in 2005. And let's fix my typo. It wasn't 2022, it was 2002, right? So now you've got a citation for Chung at 2002, and you got citation for Chung's other book at 2005. You can start making distinctions between that and this other book was written in 2005. So then later too, you could do searches. Give me every book that was published before 2005 or after 2005 or around or between certain dates. But where I was going with that is, if you have as your primary reference this idea of a citation key, what you then can start doing is more advanced capability. And so one of the things that Tinderbox supports you is this function called onAdd. And when you're doing an onAdd, what an onAdd does is it brings in this concept called action code that's in Tinderbox. And Tinderbox has this unbelievable capability. Not only can you store and collect notes, but you also talked about note curation. And in Mark Anderson's ATB ref, there is all of these different types of actions and rules or actions that you can do to manipulate the automation of your note taking. And the manipulation of the automation of your note taking is really important, because the more you can have the tool do it for you, the more you can use your brain power and resources to stick to what you do well, which is your thinking. So the point that I'm trying to raise here is, so I've got a note called Crazy Melon. Its citation key is 2002, but I've now got this quote that has no correlation to anything else. I've got a note that has no correlation to anything else. I've got a task that is of no correlation to nothing else. So what I'm going to do is, in the onAdd, I'm going to say citation key equals citation key parent. Okay, now this is a really, and again, I don't want to actually do it on this note. Now that I've written it, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to do it actually on the reference here. So what this is saying is, every time I add a new note to a reference, I want you to grab the citation key of the parent note and add that citation key to the note. So let me show you what happens when I do that. I'm going to reset the inheritance here. So now watch what happens. I'm going to add a new note to this parent. So I'm going to hit Shift Option Enter, and I get my new note. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, it did not add anything else. It just created my new note. And if I go and add my citation key back here, you'll see that the citation key for this new note is now Chung. So now if I want to go do another agent, and let's actually change this agent here. I'm going to copy it because we're going to give you this file at the end and have it by citation key. All right. And I can say, here we'll say citation key. Citation key dot format dot I contains Chung. So now I'm saying, go find me all of the books that contain the citation key that contains the word Chung in it. And so it's going to go out and find those for me. I got to spell citation right. Sorry, my screen's a little big. Okay. So now when we do that and run the agent, Tinderbox is going to go find all of the notes that contain the word citation, even this new note that we created that has that note citation. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do is on the on add, this new note didn't have a prototype to it. So let's go back to our reference and we're going to say on the add, make prototype equal to P note. So what I'm now doing is I'm saying every time I add a new note to the book that I'm reading called Crazy Melon, I want the prototype of that new note to be P prototype, and I want the citation key to be the citation key of its parent. So now if I go back here and I add a new note, you'll see it automatically added that. I can say note, a new note. And you'll see that, and if we go back to note here, we can add citation key. Okay, so now every note is going to have the citation key prototype here, and you'll now see that. So now, and if we go back to our agent, you now see the agent already automatically found that new note from Chung. Now let's say we only want to find the citations from Chung from the book 2002 up to the agent. And so now it's only finding the notes that are related from Chung 2002. But yet now we have all of these notes here, and I can go ahead and add that P note there. And so now we have all these different notes from that different book. And then let's say this was actually not a note, but it was actually a quote. So I can go ahead and change that to quote. And now I can make my quote. Okay. And you notice the citation key disappeared. Well, that disappeared because our prototype was changed. We'll go and do that. And so now we're back. And we'll go now see now each one of these. And this was a note that I previously, now here's another interesting thing. Here's a note that a quote that I previously did not, that I added, but I didn't add it with the on add function turned on. So it did not actually pick up the citation key. So then in that situation, what I would do is I would go to the next layer of Tinderbox greatness is I would then add an edict, which is basically the same, and I'll demonstrate it this way to show it. It's the same action code, but now what we're going to do is saying rather than running that action code as a one-off, what I want you to do is when you have a quote, I want you to go and grab, if the citation key is empty, I want you to go grab the citation key from the parent. And this little adding the little pipe bar is the key for that. And so if I hit enter now, so now what's going to happen is on every note that is a quote, assign the prototype P quote, Tinderbox will go out and grab the citation. If the citation key is empty, it will go and grab the citation key for that parent. So now if we go here, that citation key has now been automatically populated. So essentially what you're doing is you're using the action code of Tinderbox to automatically do the work for you in the background. That is repetitive and pattern based. And this is how and then once you've got that kind of set up for the way you want it to work, you can take as many notes as you want, and then you can run agents to go find your stuff, and Tinderbox is going to do it all for you. So I've just kind of dumped a ton on all of you. Let me take a breath, take a step back, and see what anybody has to say about everything that we just talked about, because really this is the totality of Tinderbox in terms of collecting and curation. The next stage is going to be, and actually creation too, because we're creating our own unique ideas. The only step that we've not covered thus far is contribution, basically getting your stuff out.
I followed the entire process, Michael, and can replay it instantly in my head. Thank you.
Wow, you're a better man than me. So again, we could, and if you want, we could start over from scratch and do it again and just keep iteratively going through this process. But let's just kind of summarize what we talked about doing here. We had a blank Tinderbox file, the stem cell file, basically. And we said, we want to start creating notes. What did we then say we want to do is, well, we actually have different types of notes that we want to be creating. Sometimes we want quotes, sometimes we want tasks, sometimes we want ideas, right? And in that context, then we're going to use prototypes to help us categorize and organize our management of those kinds of ideas and those kinds of quotes and those kinds of templates. What we'll then want to do is use the action code of Tinderbox to help us automatically populate attributes of different types of notes, so that will then make the searching of those notes for a future self relatively easier.
One thing that strikes me here, this is very helpful, particularly the sort of categorization of the notes. It sounds like at a very simple level, I don't need to worry about using something like Zotero. I can, as long as I have the ISBN number of a particular book, I can collect the bibliographic information right away, right here in Tinderbox.
You can, but let me see if
remember, I'm trying to keep things really simple here. I'm really, my main issue with Tinderbox is that whenever I start doing stuff, I find myself messing around a lot more with the details of Tinderbox than with the ideas that I'm trying to explore.
Yeah, no, a good point. But let me show you just, here's a really simple concept. And again, it depends on ultimately what your outcome is. And the other thing is, I'm going to now jump to the end game for me and the way I've been using the tool and using multiple pieces. So you'll see here, so yesterday, California issued a new bill that requires counties to issue verified credentials, meaning basically I can get my birth certificate, my death claim, or my marriage claim as a digitally represented tool here. By using this anchor code I have here, and again, I'll tell you why I'm doing that. You're right. Let me go back to what you asked for initially. You could go in here and put all of the bibliography information in here manually. That's fine. Not a problem. You know, and let me go find your Crazy Melon book on Amazon, and I'll show you just kind of an end state that you might want to ultimately get to. The reason why but if you find you're going to start doing this kind of stuff a lot, Amazon. So here's the book. Is that the right one? No. It's this one, maybe. Is that it? That's the book.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. All right. So you could sit here and again, I'm for one, because I'm super lazy. And because of my typos and dyslexia issues, if the tool can do it for me, the tool will be more accurate. The tool will be more consistent. So I've got this book called Crazy Melon. Now you could sit here and manually copy all of these attributes into your note and have them. Right? You
but wait a minute, it sounded like all you needed was the ISBN number and everything else would be pulled in automatically. Is that not the case?
It's pulling in for you certain things. Let's see, because I've not seen that function before. So let's go ahead and see what it's pulling in for us. Book. It seems to be, it's pulling in just the graphic. It's not pulling in date. It's not pulling in publisher. It's not pulling in other things.
Oh, okay.
All right. Now, but let's, again, that's not the tool's fault. It's just he's done many things. So let me show you one example. So I've got this book called Crazy Melon. And if I pull up my Zotero real quick. And here is my Zotero library. Okay. Now, again, because I do this not once or twice a day, I probably do this 10 times a day where I'm pulling different references. And the idea of manually copying dates and author names and all of that is just abhorrent to me. So a tool like of Zotero has a plugin for capturing references. So watch what happens. If I go ahead and capture this reference, I can click the little thing. This will automatically add this book to my Zotero library. So I now have Crazy Melon, right? I can now go in and grab the Crazy Melon citation key. So now if I go back to this piece of text, I've got other things in the background that are making this work. So I'll just go ahead and drop this Crazy Melon citation key right here, right? So, and let me demonstrate one other thing before I do that. If I go here, and because I've got another template set up here, what I would do if I were in this process, I would add the very first thing is I'm reading this book called Crazy Melon. So I'm adding the book to my Zotero library. It could be bookends. It could be there are other citation tools that this will work with. And so it's automatically captured for me all that information. So then what I do is I drag the citation over into Tinderbox, and Tinderbox automatically processes that note coming in from Zotero and gives me a pre-populated set of things. So now I can go search on that. I can do all of those other things, but I'm not, and then I can be adding my notes using that process like we just talked about for capturing notes to that book. That book I just added to my Tinderbox file. But then ultimately what I'm going to want to do is as I'm taking my notes, I'm going to drop in the citation anchors. So I'm saying, if you had no doubt, self-sovereign identities here, businesses need to get ready. Here's the evidence on such and such a date. California instituted this new law, country, death, marriage, records, blockchain, and here's the citation reference for that. Okay. Because I've done that, in the background, I'm using yet another tool called Pandoc, which is now automatically going through and pulling in the references. Right. So this is really where Tinderbox gets powerful. Because if you think about future self and the idea of publishing and the idea of automating things, and the reason why Chung is not there is because I need to export my library, because we did this so fast. That process in the back didn't happen. So let me go through and demonstrate this. So in my data directory, I'll re-export my library. Hit replace. And now if I go do that, oh, it's still exporting the items already. There we go. Okay, so now Tinderbox has automatically gone out to my exported citation library and pulled in both the citations and added the references for the book at the end. And then not to mention the fact that I'm using Chicago style citation management here. If I go here and change it to APA style citation management, I now have APA styled citations in my book. And so this is where, again, the power of Tinderbox, in that at every stage along the 5 C's of knowledge management, collection, curation, creation, collaboration, and contribution, you want the tool doing the work for you. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because this was about basically getting yourself set up in that collection and curation stage to allow future self to do what I just showed you. Right? And the setups and all of the other stuff you'd want to learn is something you can learn later. And if I've learned anything from Tinderbox, is trust in the process. Trust that each stage is incrementally lets you do what you're trying to do. And then people like Mark will come in and help, or myself will come in and help you figure out when you get to the next stage of like, how do I do this? Right? And that's where the community comes in. I'm trying to do this. How do I do it? And then somebody will invariably answer your question for you.
Great, very helpful. Thank you.
So if I could,
Yeah.
When I use this, something in work in the past, I was actually looking for keywords actually in the text. So I had a series of issues, and then I had text surrounding it. This is actually for you, Sean. I kept it incredibly simple, like you were asking. So like the way he has the quotes and a couple of basic pieces of information. When I got to a point where I'm like, you know what, I really need to do this. One thing that I don't know if you caught this with the edict where he just ran something one time to populate a whole bunch of data. That's the forgiving part of Tinderbox. You don't have to get it set up necessarily from the get-go the way it's ultimately going to be. So you find that you really need, or I found that I really needed, a piece, an attribute to be able to sort a few things together. So I created a couple of agents and broke a few things apart, and then I added the attribute to those values, and then was able to take that automation one step farther. So
And to take that a step farther, this morning I was writing at 4 a.m. today, I was writing a 200-page report. I decided that I wanted to refactor how I was calling something. And all I needed to do was run an agent, and Tinderbox went through and relabeled all 486 instances of that thing in about 10 seconds or less. So, but let's go back. The whole purpose of today's call was that collecting of notes, and I think we've demonstrated that, and then the curation of notes. And curation at its most basic of level is assigning attributes to notes and putting values to those attributes. Later, we'll get into linking and other kinds of types of curation, but I think those are the two most fundamental things to adopt when using Tinderbox, is this idea of collection and curation. Collect a bunch of notes and curate them by putting values to the attributes for those notes, and to make it more efficient for yourself, create prototypes to do this. Right. And so then that way, any notes that adopt that certain theme of idea in your head, a quote or a task or generalized note, any of those notes assigned with that will then adopt any changes made to the prototype through a concept called inheritance. And that's really the basics of simple note taking within Tinderbox. And as we demonstrated, then you can just go crazy and do the kind of stuff I'm doing down at the other end.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson, your hand's been waved for a while.
Yep. Just a quick one. I just saw I did. Yeah, I'm live. I did put a link in the sidebar. Just one thing we flew past is footnotes. So there are some methods Tinderbox has support that. So again, now we've made the point about not having to get everything right first try, and you can add your formality, your structure as you go. If, for instance, you're more comfortable with a method of just sort of taking a note, and this is a footnote to that. Tinderbox also has a way of doing that, and for instance, it will create a link between the notes for you, and that can be useful if, say, you wanted to use the hyperbolic view to see how your notes interrelate, because you might make some footnotes, and in your footnotes you might create links to other notes. So again, it also just makes the point there's no necessarily one right way, and the formalization that Michael showed is tremendously valuable, but it'll take most of us, from the start, just a little bit to ease into. Once you get it, it becomes really easy to do. But don't worry about thinking you've got to get it right straight out of the trap. It's absolutely not needed. And to me, one of the biggest joys of Tinderbox as a tool is just how forgiving it is. Whether it's adding stuff later and sort of backfilling to existing notes, or even if you need to do a do-over on something, anyone who's worked with anything like a traditional database will know that that's normally a whole can of beans. So wonderful. Peter.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to talk away while muted. That always happens. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about dealing with PDFs. I've been putting down a lot of books I've been finding on archive.org. So each one of those will have like a URL for a page that contains a reference to the book. For instance, here's the one I'm just dropping in chat now. That takes you to an archive.org page for the book. Then there'll be a link off of that PDF. And I was wondering if we could automate grabbing the PDF from just starting with the URL, and just in general, how do you deal with when you get to the point where you have a folder that's labeled PDFs that has 2,000 PDFs inside of it? That's basically where I am at the moment.
I'm saving this file. By the way, I had to stop sharing screen real quick so I can save this file. And then I'll give an answer to that. October. Okay, and then we'll say TBX 0 October. Sorry, I just gotta get this in, otherwise we'll lose it. Okay. So first and foremost, part of me wants to say you don't. Tinderbox is not the tool to be storing PDFs. Tinderbox is a tool to be taking notes about a PDF. Storing PDFs would happen in, sorry, I gotta do anything. Storing PDFs would happen in either your file system, or it would happen in a tool like DevonThink. And what you would want to do, or if it were me, what I would do in managing that type of process is I would have a tool like Hazel or something like that would then allow me to collect the or Hook, which would allow me to click the URL to that file, populate that file as an attribute in the note in Tinderbox. So that way I could be taking notes about that PDF. And if I ever wanted to look at that PDF, I could click on that attribute and it would open up that PDF for me from my hard drive or DevonThink or wherever it would happen to be sourced. That's how I would do that.
Okay, that helps.
And for those of you that didn't understand what we were just saying, we can go through that again. I got to go reopen the file. All right. Yeah, but they people
Michael,
make.
I've got something on that. I very quickly share a screen, if I may, just as easy to show for Peter's thing. Is that I don't know if you can see this one. Can people see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So this isn't tidy. It's not meant to be seen by anyone but you. This is some actual research. But the reason I mention it is you'll notice up here, I've got an absolute boatload of URLs. This is because in this case, I'm looking at accounts in Wikipedia and I'm trying to work out all sorts of things about them. But it seems to have a parallel to the point that Peter's making. So one URL, one asset may basically imply a whole lot of other links. And sometimes, rather than adding the links down here in text, it's easy to have these as push buttons because, sorry, it's come another screen, but lo and behold, if I go and just click on the globe, I'm instantly getting into all these referencing. So the point there isn't to show you what was the end of the reference. It was just to make the point that consider here, and you can do the same, for instance, with the file type attribute, in which case instead of a globe you'll see a little folder icon, and when you click that, basically Tinderbox says to find it here, go find me the thing at the end of this local path. It's I think with the amount of PDFs you've got, you probably want to put something like DevonThink in the mix. There's another whole complicated dance that goes on here is down to, it's very individual where you want to put your annotations. Do they live in the PDF and then you want to extract, say, highlights? So there's no easy one right way. There are, suffice it to say, a whole host of useful tools that can be assembled once you've figured out what you want to do and where you want, where, for instance, where you want to do your writing as opposed to, say, your annotation. Some people put annotations in a reference manager, some people put them in Tinderbox, some people put them in DevonThink. It doesn't really matter, but it's a matter of thinking, okay, so what do I want to manage the files in? Where do I want the linkage to occur? And so if you want to do some of that in Tinderbox, I would say file and URL attributes could help.
And let me show you one other thing too. The type of note taking we've been talking about thus far, and this is corollary to what Mr. Anderson was discussing. The type of note taking we've been talking about thus far in this file, frankly, for me is it's manual note taking. It's mostly my ideas or quotes, in the sense of this is quotes I'm pulling from another book. Again, going back to that point of manualness, I try to not things being manual. There is a process too where you can be taking your notes, say, for instance, in a PDF. So you could be using a PDF tool like SKIM. Let me pull up SKIM and I'll show you. So let's say you're using a PDF tool like SKIM, and we're not going to do this today because we don't have enough time. But just to show you another method of note taking, use a PDF tool like SKIM. As you're doing your reading, you're making highlights in that book. You then can export out the PDF notes out of a book like SKIM, pull it into a tool, into Tinderbox. Tinderbox will automatically parse all those highlighted notes, properly color code and code them. And not only that, add in the URL to where in the SKIM file that quote was taken. Right? So that's another way of taking notes with Tinderbox. So I can drop all the way down here, say, okay, here's the note, here's the highlighted note I took from that book. And here it is where it actually is in that on page 15 in that PDF file I read.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Right?
Does that work with real books? Just kidding.
Pretty much with real books. No, yeah, exactly. So now here's another quote. So here's an actual quote. So the other thing I'm on, and then I can just go ahead here and drop me right back to that page in the book. So that's another methodology of note taking. So again, use the tool to automate as much as you can. So for me, it's kind of layers of triage. I read a PDF, I highlight a PDF, I pull in that into my document. I then can go through and like here's go through and refine then the next layer, add in my own comments, add in my own quotes, add in my own elements, add in tasks like Sean was suggesting earlier for me to go do later. And so then I can be really incrementally doing that. And if you notice, every one of these books has captured its citation key, where in the book it came from, was it a highlight, what page number it was on. You're getting all of that information done for you automatically. Right? Or you go back here and simply manually do it like we've been doing before. And frankly, if you're getting started, I'd encourage you to start the manual process. And then as you go through, the fact that you're aware that it can be automated, at some point, future self will thank you because you're going to then save yourself a ton of time. But again, let's take a breath. Let's go just basic fundamentals, right? Basic fundamentals. You open up a Tinderbox file. It's a stem cell. It can be anything you want it to be. You go in and add a note, right? And using, so I've added a note. And using Sean's example, maybe I want to add a quote to this note. So in order to make that a quote, I can go ahead and manually add an attribute to that, or I can quickly go and drop in a prototype. The second I get into this kind of mode, I drop in and go into outline view. So now I've got a note, I've got a quote, and I've got a prototype. I'm going to go ahead and create myself immediately a prototype I call quotes. I'm then going to go ahead and give it its little icon thingy so I can see that. And I'm now going to make that note quote, right? And I now can say anything about this quote I want, like the future already here. It is just unevenly distributed. Okay. So I started to take a note. And then I'm thinking, oh, you know what? There's more than I want to know about this note than just a quote. I want to actually know who the author was. I'm going to go and say author. All right. And the author was William Gibson. All right. So now if I go back here, oops, and and here's the thing. I put the William Gibson actually in the prototypes, and then that populated everywhere. So now I'm going to do that there. Okay. So the author, so now I have a quote by William Gibson, who's the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Okay. Now for me, specifically from note type quotes, what I personally want to know is, and help me stimulate it as I'm like quickly going through Tinderbox, I'm actually going to change it. I don't like labeling my quotes quote and then giving it some hard-coded name. I personally like having the first 25 or 35 characters of the name of the quote to be the quote name. That's what I prefer. So the way I go about doing that is, again, using action code. I'm going to come here. I'm going to say edict. And this is on the quote prototype. And I'm going to say, make the name equal to the text. Okay, well, what do I want to do with the text? I want to grab the substring of the text, and I want to start with the 0 character, the very first character. I want to then grab up to the 35th character. And then what I want to do is I want to say plus 1, 2, 3. Right? So now when I hit enter, Tinderbox is going to dutifully go through, and actually I don't want that on the prototype. Go back here and say p quote. Okay, so there's my quote, and there you go. So now Tinderbox has gone through it, automatically relabeled my quotes. The future is already here, it is, and then blah, ... So now I know that's a quote. Now I want to modify that a little bit more, and I'm going to say, actually, what I want you to do, because I like prefixes, I'm going to say quote, space, that. Now when I go through, they've all been changed. Now if I ever want to add a new quote, Mark, and then this is typically how I would do it, because now I know my quotes names are going to change. I just go like this and put in my quote, the Tinderbox community. Thanks, Mark B and Mark A are magicians. Right? So I've got another quote that I've just done. Okay, and because I know this is going to be a quote, and because I know Tinderbox is automatically going to change the name for me, now when I go apply that quote, there it is. And now the quotes and the name's automatically been changed. It's automatically done that. And if you go back to my main file here, you'll see here's the style strategy I'm using for that. So now when I'm looking for a quote, I can quickly go down my list of quote notes. Like here's a bunch of and I actually stick in the author's name, the year they said it, and then here's the quote. So I can then quickly go down and and look for that quote that I'm looking for. And then I have Tinderbox apply a template to that and actually give me a pre-formatted templated version of that quote. And then I can go paste that into anything I want. So that's the other kinds of methodologies you can do with leveraging and using Tinderbox. So I'm hearing massive crickets. So clearly I've just had the goldfish float up to the top of the fishbowl.
No, I think my brain just went 14,000 places at one time.
Bruce Gale has been trying to get me to solve that problem for 2.5 years now, I think. I don't know if it's actually ever going to be solvable, but we'll see. Thoughts, questions, ideas? We got about 4 minutes left.
Michael, the thing that it impresses me from week to week, session to session, is how basically Tinderbox puts into the hands of individuals supercomputer power.
Yes.
And I mean, I wish we could do a poll of how many professional software developers are in this session. My guess is under 5, right? But you would, Michael, you do not, even though you are, well, I don't know. You don't have any professional training as a software developer, do you? You
Not
just
even close.
self-taught.
All my training is me and Mr. Anderson at about 3 a.m. my time screwing around with this tool.
Right. It's learning it on the fly from the expert.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, I mean, I look at what you were doing here. I mean, I used to mess around with a long dead mainframe software product called a data dictionary. The term is still used, doesn't mean at all how I'm using it. This came out of a British government sponsored award in the mid 60s. And I wish I knew what it cost in the mid 60s and the 70s. But basically, I mean,
so what I'm
incredibly impressive, Mark Bernstein and Mark Anderson, what you guys have put together.
So when I look at Tinderbox, the epiphany I had was fundamentally Tinderbox is a text transformation utility. And remember, and more importantly, it's an attribute value transformation utility. So for example, remember this text right here and this name right here, that's just another attribute, just happens to be displayed in the UI. So if you move yourself away, disassociate yourself from any aspect of the UI, everything is in Tinderbox as an attribute. Every attribute can be manipulated by action code, and every attribute value can be presented in whatever template you want. And as soon as you get that, and as quickly as you can get that, you can then realize I can do anything that the internet can do with Tinderbox about 95% of the time. I can put any content I want in, I can transform the content to anywhere, any place and time that I need it to be in. I can render it in any appearance I want and any structural layout I want. That's what Tinderbox can do. And then invariably, how you go about it, and then that goes back to trust. I trust that that statement I just said is true 95% of the time. I don't know how to do it 75% of the time. So then what I'll do is I've done this before too. I'll have gotten a piece of paper and I'll say, Mark Anderson, how do I build that? And how do I populate these cells with these values? And then he and I will sit there and brainstorm the best way to write some action code to do that, or some export code to do that. But the reality is Tinderbox, if you get that, Tinderbox is the tools for transforming text and pulling in external images into that text. You can do anything with this tool you want.
And I'm particularly coming as a software vendor. Vendors are always want to tell you that their tool is the universal tool. And I'm perpetually impressed how Mark Bernstein and Anderson have basically said, and while he was just here today, someone was saying, well, Peter was, and you guys chimed, no. Tinderbox is not the tool to use to manage PDFs. Use DevonThink. It's like when you go to a toolbox in the physical world, you can figure out, oh, I want a hammer for this job. Oh, I want a screwdriver for the other job. Software vendors instinctively tell you the only thing you need is a hammer. And Mark Bernstein seems to, the environment is very encouraging to say, well, here's the tool for this and there's the tool for that.
And I'm going to go back to the point that Sean made earlier. Like Sean, you're right. You can put all that bibliographic information into the attributes of Tinderbox. But I personally choose not to do that manually. I choose to let Zotero capture that information for me. I then drag the Zotero file over to the Tinderbox file, and it all automatically gets populated for me. And that's a great example of picking the tool that does the job right. Tinderbox is not a great tool necessarily to be capturing all of that bibliographic metadata. That's what Zotero's for. And then you can pull it over and then let Tinderbox do its thing. Or bookends, or any number of the open source citation software tools can do it.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce the notion. I mean, I put in the sidebar, but I think it's worth saying in the thing is that the saddest thing I see people is massively overcommitting to a particular tool because they really like it. That when that tool quite patently cannot either import it what it needs to import or export. And it's frustrating, and it's because you want it to work. You really like this feature in that app, but actually, if your overall need is to take my notes here, put them into this repository there, maybe then work into them in some other thing here, you actually have to do that. And the other thing is very, very few applications annotate that part of the process because, well, why would they? Because that's not what you get the app for. You get the app for it to do what it does. But so that's why actually the onus is on us as the users to actually delve into the corners, or come into the forum and ask people, can I get this from that? I mean, I think it's Bruce asked me, well, can I do something with liquids notes that like Michael was doing with SKIM? I said, well, all we're doing in SKIM was looking at information that was in the text of what SKIM exports.
Yeah.
So, if, for instance, Liquid does similar, then it's very likely you can do the same. If it doesn't, or it has a very different method, or it separates out some of the metadata from the text, then it may be harder or impossible. I mean, you won't know till you try. And very often you'll be lucky also if it's well documented for you. So don't expect all these things to work well together, apart from the ones, for instance, like some, Bookends and DevonThink and Tinderbox and Scrivener and a number of apps have played very nicely because behind the scenes and to our benefit, the developers have taken it upon themselves to actually make a number of these things much easier. But I still think it's caveat emptor for all of us when we're trying to put, different things together. So, taking your reference manager of choice, actually understanding what it can or can't export. So often the thing that you want to do is possible, just not in the way that you intuited it.
Yeah, and that last
look
statement,
at these settings.
and that last statement, I think is really important. So as I said, 95% of the time, Tinderbox will do what I need it to do, not necessarily what I want it to do. And what I mean by that, and when I say want, in the way I think it should be done. So 95% of the time, there is a way to get done what I want to have done in Tinderbox. It just we may apply a different method than my brain was intuiting initially and the way it should be done. But there is that 5% of the time where Tinderbox just can't do it. And invariably, I'd say of that 5%, 4% of that is because it doesn't do it yet. And invariably, Mark, either in a matter of days or sometimes a couple of months, will invent that feature for us and put it into the code. And then there's that 1.5%, 2% of the time where it actually is a bug and he dutifully fixes it once we find it. And it's one of those crazy edge cases that, no one has actually ever done before, or it wasn't tested. And that's what, that's just the nature of software. But, half to 1.5% of the time finding a bug is its software code goes pretty good. If you look at it in Microsoft, it's much more than that.
Or it's something you just shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, or it's something you shouldn't be doing. What Mark Anderson tells me all that time too is, if it's that hard, it's probably nature telling you it's something you shouldn't do. Right. So find a different way to do it. But
they prodded it won't get better. Yeah.
Right. But if we go, we're a little over today, but if we go back to the fundamentals here of today's call, and I want to circle back to why we joined today's call. But today's call was about how do you start collecting and capturing notes. And I think we accomplished that. I mean, we said you can throw some notes in there, you assign some attributes to those notes to be able to find them later, note to future self. And then you can use all of the different utilities that Tinderbox gives us to then explore that data to make meaning of it. And that's really what all this is about. Was this helpful, everyone? I just gotta kind of take a pause. I mean, we're kind of all over the map, but I'm hoping we created some value here today.
Yep.
We've had a request to look into demoing SKIM to Tinderbox next week. Is that an interesting topic?
Yeah, I've already got it canned up, so it's an easy one for me to go through and do for people.
Yes, please.
Oh,
So
very good.
Yeah.
essentially what you showed SKIM can do is like the line numbers on a court transcript.
Yeah, well, let me just, I'll give you a preview of next week in just the last few minutes. So what you can do, and it took me about maybe 30 minutes to figure this out. So if you're in SKIM, you go to export. Out of the box, SKIM gives you some standard ways of getting data out of out of it. So if I take a standardized SKIM to notes as text, and we'll go drop this in here, downloads, reading that, and I go open up that file. What SKIM is exporting is this text file here. So SKIM just exported this text file in this format. Star, highlight, page 2, blah, 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 works fine. What I realized in looking through the SKIM documentation, however, is I didn't want the document to be exported in that way. So what I did is, using the SKIM documentation, I quickly wrote myself a little SKIM template that I'll give everybody next week. And and again, it only took about 30 minutes. I was able to transform it to now parse it in a way that's easier for me to have in Tinderbox. So I have SKIM exporting for every note, put this delimiter, a hashtag, and the word note. And then I want you to put a type, colon, color, colon, page, colon, URL, colon, And then I'm just using Tinderbox action code to go through and parse this file when I drag it into a note. And that's all it is. So next week, what we'll do is we'll show you how I wrote this template, but more importantly, we'll show you the action code that will go through and parse this and then automatically produce your note.
Tune
Super.
in next week.
And then we'll figure out what we do the week after that, but that's easy enough. I mean, really, really powerful stuff. So here we're taking manual notes, and here we're taking notes that we've been highlighting in a book or a PDF. All good?
Yep.
Excellent.
Looking forward to next week.
All right, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Michael.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Take care.